Hello everybody, welcome. I'm here to talk about some of the cost measurement methods that we use currently and have used in the past, so bear with me. Financial reports provide users with information so they can make decisions about how they allocate these scarce resources. According to the conceptual framework, information needs to be relevant and representationally faithful, which means it needs to be both useful and truthful. The preparers of such documents need to allocate values to the company's assets. Previously, historical cost has been the preferred method. That is, an asset is recorded at the amount of cash or cash equivalents paid or the fair value of the consideration given to acquire it at its acquisition date. This method has continued to be a popular measurement choice for many years. The reason for this is the following benefits. It's very easy to obtain the values. The costs are very minimal because of this simplicity, so it's efficient and effective. It's very accurate at the time of purchase, and it requires no arbitrary judgment. However, from the 1930s, other methods began to be proposed as it was increasingly questioned as to how relevant this method is and whether it was affecting the financial report's usefulness. There were some weaknesses with historical cost measurement. With the high inflation times of the 1970s and 80s, rapid changes in technology and the increase in globalisation, these weaknesses have only amplified. The weaknesses are as follows. The value doesn't move in response to inflation or deflation, so the book value can over time become considerably different to the realisable value, e.g. shares and property. Also, historical cost doesn't adjust for changes in consumer preferences and technological advances. Some items will no longer be as popular and worth virtually nothing, while others will be sought after and would have increased in value. It doesn't adjust for fluctuation in exchange rates, increasingly an issue given that most companies now deal offshore in some way or another, even if it's just purchasing some of their inputs for their products. Without adjustments for such variables, the entity's accounts do not reflect economic reality. In a high inflation environment, assets values will substantially be understated and return on assets will be overstated. This affects the framework's objective of usefulness as the information is misleading. Other measurement methods have been proposed over many years. However, changes to or the introduction of new standards does change the numbers in financial reports, and because of this, it has the potential to create significant social and economic consequences, so they need to be considered carefully. Some of the other measurement methods, while they haven't sustained, they have had some popularity over time. Many of them that have been suggested, I'd like to briefly discuss 4 of them. There's the current purchasing power accounting, its current cost accounts, the continuously contemporary method, and the fair value method. The current purchasing power accounting, where adjustments were made at the end of the period on the historical cost accounts, was developed in the 1930s and 60s by Sweeney. The strengths were that the cost to obtain this data was very minimal because it's based on historical costs and we already have that data. It separated monetary and non-monetary items. Monetary didn't change, but the non-monetary items were adjusted. In the times of rising prices, this method gives a better indication of a company's purchasing power and the change in that between the various reporting periods. The weaknesses, the information was kind of confusing and it wasn't supported by the users in its decision usefulness, and it didn't adjust for specific price movements in individual assets. Edwards and Bell proposed the current cost accounts, where values are based on actual valuations or replacement costs. Historical costs can be the base and it's adjusted at year end. The strengths were that the profit gains through the trading of the actual entity were separate from the holding gains and losses, giving a better indication of the entity's actual performance and keeping management accountable. And this made it much more comparable to other entities' performance as well, or the previous period's performance. The weaknesses were that it can be arbitrary, especially in relation to depreciation, and calculating replacement costs of assets can be challenging. Some firms may decide not to replace a certain asset at all, due to technological advances or something like that, and they'll opt for something completely different. So trying to put a value on these type of assets can be tricky. Okay, the continuously contemporary, or COCO, was developed by Ray Chambers, and this is quite a different method. It's similar to current cost accounting, but it's based on exit values, and it was all about, the focus was on the entity's capacity to adapt to changing market conditions. And he saw this as the key information for users. Profit was directly related to changes in adaptive capital, which is replicated by total exit values of assets. So that change in capital from one period to another, and how the entity was able to adapt and, you know, basically go to market and be able to purchase things. You know, it still needed to have that same level. So the strengths, it allowed for additivity, and it isn't arbitrary. It was simple, and its simplicity was actually the beauty of it, because it's based on changing entities' exit prices. Weaknesses. This is a huge change to how things are done currently, or were done at the time, and so such a fundamental shift could have catastrophic consequences across the market, including social and even environmental consequences. And also the relevance was still questionable, because if the asset wasn't expected to sell because of these kind of technological advances that we've talked about previously. Okay, fair value. Fair value is one we should touch on a bit, because it's actually gaining popularity and has been sustained for a while. It's defined as the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. Its strength is mainly its relevance for the intended users. It's very up-to-date information, which makes it very relevant to the users. Weaknesses, it's much more subjective and requires professional judgment to be applied, and this can always allow for biases or self-interest to creep in to the measurement process, which obviously isn't ideal. Particularly problematic when markets are volatile or an asset isn't actively traded, so getting a value requires quite a lot of judgment or estimation. New methods are developed constantly as a reaction to the weaknesses identified in the current methods. Historical cost remains popular, but it has its limitations, and that's why these other ones have been proposed in the past. However, the fair value method is the only one that's gained significant support in recent times and is increasingly used more often. There are 5 factors to consider when you're choosing a measurement method. It's the value and the flow, the confidence level that you have in that measurement method and giving an accurate thing, a value. Comparability, you want to be able to compare periods and to other entities. Otherwise, you know, you can't make those decisions about how to allocate your resources. Understandability, obviously, if it's not understandable to the user, it basically has no use to them whatsoever and might as well not be done. But also the cost of preparing should not outweigh the benefits. So that's where historical cost was great. The costs were very minimal, but not as relevant, whereas fair value can be quite relevant, but the costs can be significantly more. In summary, historical cost has lost relevance over time. Entities are increasingly involved in overseas markets with foreign exchange fluctuations. Advances in technology makes assets obsolete before they are depreciated, and price level changes need to be adjusted to better show the entity's change in purchasing power. These weren't always issues and still aren't for some assets, which is why it is still popular and used today. It is a simple measurement and easy to obtain, and costs are minimal. And while the value may lose relevance, it is an accurate value at the time of purchase and not subject to any professional judgment. Nevertheless, the weaknesses in historical cost is why so much has been spent developing alternatives, and while there have been a few, fair value is the only one that has gained significant support in current times. Adjusting to market conditions allows this measurement to have the ability to produce more relevant and useful information, but often requires professional judgment from preparers, and this can lead to the possibility of bias in the measurement process. It can also be difficult to obtain current market values and therefore costly to the entity. Ultimately, both historical cost and fair value are useful in different areas, and I believe a combination of the two is essential to provide information that is relevant and representationally faithful to the users, understandable, comparable, and without the costs of preparation outweighing the benefits to the said users. Thank you very much for your time.